Peter Credlin, live on Sky News Australia.
Good evening, welcome to the show. Great to have your company as always. Big news out of Canberra, we'll get to that right now. Another former detainee has been arrested after allegedly breaching his reporting obligations as a registered child sex offender. This is now 3 foreign criminals charged with new criminal offences as community safety rightly mounts. All the while, those in charge of the Albanese government, well, they have gone to ground. Calls to reining the cost of blowouts within the NDIS are growing, with the Commonwealth and states set for a showdown tomorrow at National Cabinet. Reports today that some individuals are in receipt of $2 million worth of services per annum. Well, that shows the system is simply not sustainable. Plus, a sigh of relief for mortgage holders as the RBA puts the cash rate on hold at its final meeting for the year. Well, have we turned the corner? I'll get an update from Ross Greenwood shortly. And a fiery day in the Senate. The coalition putting Labor under pressure over the detainee crisis as calls intensify for Ministers Giles and O'Neill to stand down.
Minister, why can't your government keep children safe? In light of these further revelations, will the Prime Minister show some strength and sack Ministers Giles and O'Neill, who created this situation through their own incompetence?
I'll be joined shortly by Senator Michaelia Cash there, but first, ever since the High Court decision was brought down that foreign criminals would be let out of detention and into the community, this government, right up to the Prime Minister himself, has looked completely inept, incompetent and, frankly, like a bunch of third-rate amateurs. And as they've lurched from one stuff-up to the next, I've sat down to write my editorial each night. And even for tonight's show, I thought to myself, surely it can't get worse, but then it does. Now, I've honestly never seen anything like this. Not in the Rudd years, not even in the Gillard years, were marked by chaos, calamity and corruption. But given that many of the Albanese government ministers, including the Prime Minister himself, were all there in the Rudd-Gillard era, why should I be surprised that Labor does not seem fit for office? And how could they be, with yet another foreign criminal arrested and back behind bars for an alleged indecent assault in Adelaide, another arrested in Sydney for alleged drug offences, and capped off this afternoon with a third former detainee, a convicted ringleader of a child sex exploitation gang, released from detention last month and today arrested in Melbourne for allegedly breaching his conditions after making contact with a minor. Now, the reality is that with almost 150 of these foreign criminals at large in the Australian community, these 3 arrests won't be the end of it. But it should be the end of ministers supposed to be in charge of the home affairs and immigration portfolios. And I tell you, if Australians could vote this weekend, quite possibly the end of this Labor government too. Today, Ministers Claire O'Neill and Andrew Giles went to ground. They refused to do media. They refused to front the Australian people and answer the questions most people reasonably have. Why are these foreign criminals out on the street? And what are you doing, Minister, to keep me and my family safe? Perhaps worst of all is the sheer gutlessness of the Prime Minister. Now, as I've said before, the fish rots from the head. And the fact that the Prime Minister hid in his office and away from the media as news broke of these arrests says everything. The bloke's a pretender. Albanese is not up to the job and he's out of depth, and Australians now know it. Look at what's happened, because it hasn't been long for the consequences to come from the government releasing into the community 148 dangerous foreign criminals. One of them is now back behind bars after the alleged indecent assault in Adelaide. Another, as I said, arrested in Sydney for drug offences. This is what happens when the Green left governments surrender to their instincts on illegal migration and let out 148 foreign criminals when the High Court only delivered a judgment related to just one, the man who raped a 10-year-old boy in Australia, NZYQ. Now, there is no doubt that Labor knew releasing these detainees was a danger, but it clearly decided that dealing with it was all too hard, which is why there's now another alleged victim in Adelaide and these victims in Melbourne, or kids allegedly put at risk in Melbourne. So what do we know about the bloke in Adelaide? Well, his name is Alayawi Yoyawi. He came to Australia illegally by boat under Labor in 2010 from Afghanistan, where he said his father and brother had been killed. While working at an abattoir in South Australia, he attacked 3 elderly women in the space of 14 months. In sentencing him in 2016, the presiding judge described him as a danger to the Australian community. Well, that's exactly what he's turned out to be. 3 weeks after he was needlessly released from immigration detention, he's in jail again, charged with 2 counts of indecent assault. What about the man arrested in Dandenong, the former ringleader of a child sex exploitation gang that, as the Herald Sun reports, is alleged by police to have run a prostitution ring that preyed on vulnerable children in state care? His name is Emran Dard, aged 33, and in 2012 he pleaded guilty to procuring young girls for a prostitution syndicate, including, as reported in court, claims he traded a pack of cigarettes for sex with one young 13-year-old. The opposition, quite rightly, is calling for the sacking of the ministers responsible for these stuff-ups, Claire O'Neill and Immigration Minister Andrew Giles.
Minister Giles here and Minister O'Neill are completely out of their depth, and the Prime Minister should sack Andrew Giles and sack Claire O'Neill.
Sack these hopeless ministers, Minister Giles and Minister O'Neill, because the consequences are now writ large. Go and ask the woman in South Australia who was sexually assaulted what she thinks of the way your government has handled this.
They won't do the honourable thing and resign, then the Prime Minister should step in and sack both ministers.
Labor only needed to release 1 dangerous criminal, NZYQ, yet they let 148 out, with perhaps more to come. The government warned this High Court decision was looming, yet they never had a plan B. And sure, the government's now rushing through the Parliament legislation it said must happen last week, but can you believe they still haven't even bothered to introduce the bill into the Parliament yet? And we're told it's ready, but it still hasn't been introduced, not yesterday and not today. Now, honestly, it should already be past the Senate by now, being transmitted to the House for urgent passage tomorrow if this government had any brains. Maybe if it had done all of that and done everything it said it would be, there'd be now 1 less alleged victim of crime. Maybe. But as Peter Dutton's already pointed out, he's concerned that Labor's plan to fix this mess, the mess of their own making, he's concerned it won't be enough to put these foreign criminals back into detention.
No, they haven't, but I think we should be very clear here that the regime that the government's providing might have application to 2 or 3 or 4 people. That's it. So the other 142 that they've unnecessarily released into the community now have the potential to cause harm, and I think the Australian public are rightly very angry about it. This is a government that has botched it. They have made our community less safe. They have put people out into the community that should be on a plane out of our country. These are not people who are of good character. We welcome people in their millions to our country because they are people of good character, because in many cases they make great Australians. And we're a wonderful society today because of migration, but we should not allow people to be released into the community who have committed sex offences against children, who are non-citizens offending against Australian citizens.
I don't know about you, but almost nothing better than this shows just how soft Labor is on borders, or that this Prime Minister is simply not up to the job. All right, let's go to camera now for the headlines. Sky News political reporter Olivia Casely.
Anthony Albanese is fending off calls for him to sack 2 of his ministers after 3 individuals released as a result of the High Court NZYQ decision allegedly reoffended over the weekend. One man, Eliyawa Yawari, is alleged to have indecently assaulted a woman in South Australia. Another was charged with drug possession. The third, a former ringleader of a child exploitation gang, had breached detention orders.
A court was told how he once traded a pack of cigarettes for sex with a 13-year-old girl.
Maybe you can stand up and explain to the gallery why you voted with the Greens, to slow down a stronger regime to protect the community.
We need to be clear here. It wasn't the government's preference for these people to be on the street.
The coalition says it's highly likely there'll be more victims, and the Home Affairs and Immigration Ministers should go.
This was all predictable and it was avoidable. The ministers made catastrophic mistakes in his decision-making.
Either way, the opposition trying to inflict as much political pain as possible in the final sitting week of the year.
Everything is F_CKED. That's about the only thing you can say about this government at the moment.
National Cabinet will meet tomorrow to nut out a response to a sweeping review into the National Disability Insurance Scheme. As the Commonwealth moves to rein in ballooning spending, set to hit almost $100 billion next decade, there's a bigger push for local, state and territory governments to provide additional support services outside the scheme. Sky News can reveal tougher regulation will be introduced next week to crack down on price gouging and a so-called wedding tax that sees participants paying more for the same services.
As soon as you hear the words NDIS, they increase the price. I think that's incredibly unethical behaviour, and I think sooner rather than later we'll have some regulatory tools to start clamping down on that profiteering at the expense of the disabled.
How soon?
Really soon.
Brittany Higgins has returned to the witness stand for the 5th day of questioning as part of Bruce Larriman's defamation trial against Channel 10 and Lisa Wilkinson. It was a gruelling day of testimony for the former Liberal staffer as Larriman's lawyer probed her version of events on the night of the alleged rape. I want to suggest to you, you don't look 10 out of 10 drunk or in any distress at that point. Do you accept that? I hadn't been raped yet, but I was skipping in the middle of Parliament with no shoes on, so it indicates someone who's pretty drunk. The judge-only trial is due to finish at the end of next week.
Right, another big day, lots to get through. Joining me now for the latest, Sky News political editor Andrew Clennell. Well, I've gone through the details. That third detainee this afternoon, a convicted child sex offender. Andrew, we had obviously that incident in relation to the arrest in Adelaide on Saturday night. A woman alleging she had been indecently assaulted. He has been charged. He has been in detention now, obviously, and someone else in Sydney for alleged drug offences. I said at the top of the show, I didn't think it could get any worse for the government today, but it has. I'm surprised, over the weekend, all those reports to say this PM's a weak bloke, he's a beta male, he's not a leader. I am surprised today, given all of this happening, he did not, the Prime Minister, front the cameras and speak to the Australian people.
Yeah, I'm a bit surprised he hasn't been doing that, a bit surprised his ministers haven't been out, and a bit surprised at the general reaction of the government. I mean, 1 minute the Home Affairs Minister's saying, we will sit until these preventive detention laws pass or what have you. Next minute it's okay just to pass them on Thursday, and they've been caught short again. This time the perception is because these characters have been picked up for various offences over the weekend, there wasn't the urgency that was required. There also wasn't the urgency required once the decision came down. There are also questions the opposition is asking about, do you have to release as many as you have? It seems a calculation that they would go for compensation. Well, can't you just wait until the preventive detention laws are in place and let them appeal to the court to be released one by one? Look, it just hasn't been smooth at all. It's now dominating discussion. It feeds into a competence argument in terms of the government. It's a real worry, and senior people within the government know that it's a worry. I think one of the issues Anthony Albanese has, Peter, is that he likes to come up with a plan and pretty much stick to it. And I think I've said this to you before. The best politicians I've seen, the John Howards, the Bob Carrs, they know how to pivot. Where's the pivot? It's almost like the PM's just exhausted after the year and all the overseas travel he's had, but he only needs to do a couple of more weeks of hard things. And just to rock up on Thursday and sort of say, oh, well, so, he's going to rock up tomorrow with National Cabinet, obviously, but that'll be dominated by the NDIS. Just to rock up in Parliament on Thursday and say, OK, now we're dealing with it, that would be fine, except it's almost the worst case scenario for the government. They've had these offences occur. Now, imagine how angry you are if you're that woman in South Australia who was allegedly indecently assaulted, or her family, at the fact this guy was out. The more they let this go,
imagine how
the more chance there'll be more offences and more serious. That's what it looks like 100%. At the moment.
Imagine being a parent in Melbourne. You've got a convicted child pedophile. Not just that, I mean, a ringleader of an exploitation gang out there in the community. He has clearly approached a minor. That's what the charge is. So if you're a parent in Melbourne and this bloke could get to some kids, there's 140 odd others out there. We don't know where they are. We don't know the gravity of their criminal convictions prior to release, but you're not confident that they might be getting to kids, or they might be, casing an elderly woman's house. This is the worry. It doesn't actually have to happen to you. You just have to worry that it's going to happen to you. And surely he has got to do something about these two ministers, because it's just not one thing. It's just been a calamity from woe to go.
They're under a lot of pressure. I guess one reset you could do early in the new year is certainly to reshuffle there. There's no doubt about it. They're under pressure. That's why they're not out there appearing. I'm sure the Prime Minister's office is thinking we won't put them out there to confront this. Well, it is a crisis. You can say it's a crisis of the High Court's making, not yours, but that means the Minister has to be out there talking about it every day. And I think back to other immigration ministers I've covered, people like Philip Ruddock. He had the competence to be out there every day, mounting the argument in terms of what the government's doing. Mm-hmm. If Claire O'Neill and Andrew Giles aren't up to that, why are they in the job?
Why indeed. Hey, this afternoon you revealed some interesting stuff about the proposed, I think they're calling it a community detention regime, but they're going to mirror what happens in relation to terrorist offenders. There's a current regime that's already in place. It's operating. We're told it's the gold standard. It's what we'll sort of replicate when this legislation eventually gets introduced and passed, of course, by the Parliament. But there's some concern you've picked up about how widespread, I guess how user-friendly the current regime is. What can you tell us?
Well, it's only 2 people have been subject to continuing detention and one's already out in terms of the terror laws. Now, these were laws introduced in 2016 by the former coalition government. They were introduced because there were a bunch of terror plotters after the London attacks, after September 11, thrown in jail, and they were about to get out. And there was a concern about letting them back on the streets. But ultimately, it's only...
I'm gobsmacked. It's just 2, mate. I'm gobsmacked. Because we've got about 70 odd that are due for parole very soon.
Well, I just put the question, I just thought it might be a good idea. I mean, how widely used are these things? Now, the government itself says they're very similar to these laws, and the big similarity is it relies on a judge. A judge has to say, as opposed to, say, a government official, in the case of what we've had in immigration detention, they have to be of the belief the person's an unacceptable risk of reoffending. Even in this preventive detention legislation that the government's put forward, and I note the opposition's not doing much to amend it, by the way, it says that the judge can decide, rather than have the detention order and throw them in jail, that they be subject to a community safety order instead and monitored or have certain restrictions put on them. Now, how many times do you reckon a judge is going to go for that softer option, benefit of the doubt option? Most times, I think. If they breach that, well, then maybe they get the detention order. But it still is a situation where you would expect the courts won't go anywhere near locking up the 141. It just won't happen. If I was the government, I'd be redoubling deportation efforts, and I wouldn't be releasing any more, frankly. let them go to court and fight their way out of immigration.
They haven't got the ticket for it, mate. You know that this is a fight on Labor's flank, right? This is an absolute problem with the left. You've got a left Prime Minister, you've got the left faction in control. I think they just hid behind the High Court decision, that's my honest view, and decided let's just get all these people out of detention, blame it on the High Court, and it has just progressively blown up all the way through that announcement of 3 to 4 weeks ago, and they've not been able to remediate it. Now, I reckon you get the legislation into the Parliament right now. It may well need amendment, given what you've exposed there as a real weakness, but they can't even introduce it. I mean, they have not even introduced the bills. We're into Tuesday, tomorrow's Wednesday, and the death knell's there on Friday. I just think it's crazy. I think it's crazy.
The coalition actually forced them in the Senate this afternoon to introduce the bill. The coalition moved that they introduced the bill, but that's the only reason. Otherwise, it was slated for tomorrow. But the House doesn't. The House sits tomorrow, but it's condolence motions for Peter Murphy all day, so it can't consider it till Thursday. They better hope there's no more offences or arrests until Thursday.
Well, there's my homework tonight, mate. I'll be taking that bill off the website and reading it cover to cover. Tomorrow, National Cabinet, NDIS at the top of the agenda. I was staggered to read today that some people on the NDIS are receiving as much as $2 million worth of services. This is for an individual per annum. We know it costs more than Medicare. It'll soon outstrip defence. Do you reckon we're going to see any real reform coming out of the meeting tomorrow, Andrew?
I do, but I think they're going to have a very hard time getting the states to pick up more of the tab, which is one of the things they want to do. But my information is they're going to propose a new regime where certain more minor disorders are taken out of the scheme. So let's see. But that's what my understanding of the announcement is. It's necessary reform. Look, the rorts and the waste are something they need to crack down on too, and they have been doing so. But ultimately, there are too many people on this scheme and it's just growing tens of thousands per year, and it shouldn't be. It's not what it was designed for. It was designed for the most severely disabled. That's what it was for. That's not what they've delivered. That's why it's costing us a bomb. And it's not even means tested, as the IMF suggests. So rich people are getting it, frankly. I mean, it's just completely unsustainable. There have to be other ways that people can deal with ailments than just dump everyone on this scheme.
Well, they were meant to stay on the disability support pension and migrate off that over time. This was meant to be for the most profoundly disabled. It's not. It was meant to be an insurance scheme. It's not. And it was meant to be collaborative with the states. It's not. They just cost shift. I remember I was there working for Tony Abbott when Gillard came up with the concept, and it was set up to fail. Thank you, Andrew. Thanks for your time. I said last night too, remember that story on Ben Forden, that some NDIS providers were offering to take clients to strip clubs. This was in their promotional material. I put some questions to Bill Shorten's office about this. He came back to us just as I went on air and said that they are investigating the claims. We will see. Let's go now to that decision. Just before I go, I want to mention too, revelations in the Brittany Higgins defamation action. She has made clear in evidence that she has received $2.3 million from the federal government for failing what is regarded as her duty or their duty of care to her. This was, if you remember, a figure bandied around of $3 million. Well, confirmation there that it's over $2 million. All right, let's go to the RBA decision. A bit of Christmas good news. This afternoon, the bank made the decision in their final meeting of the year to leave the cash rate on hold, 4.35%. This comes, of course, after the most recent CPI data, inflation data, showed a slight drop from 4.9% in October, to 4.9% in October, down from 5.6% in September. It's still a long way, almost double from where the RBA wants to get it down to, its target band of between 2 and 3%. Joining me now for a bit of analysis, Sky News business editor Ross Greenwood. Well, do you reckon it was a CPI drop, Ross, that meant there was no change to the cash rate today?
Yeah, I'm pretty certain it was. There's almost no doubt that that's what they were thinking. They've got a bit of time. There's one issue. Michelle Bullock, the Reserve Bank Governor, has talked about sticky inflation and homegrown inflation. And the real problem of the monthly inflation data you were talking about there is it doesn't pick up a lot of the services or the homegrown inflation, if you like, that we've got. And so really you've got a situation there whereby because it's not picking up that style of inflation, that won't come out until the quarterly inflation number comes out. They, I think, just want to sit back and just see just what this inflation story really does look like. And of course, by that time, they'll also get a lot of the retail sales figures from over Christmas time. And there's sort of conflicting information here about whether people are really doing it tough or indeed whether they're able to continue to keep on spending. But this is the bottom line of the whole thing. If you have a look at somebody with, say, the average mortgage in Australia is about $750,000 for people taking out a new mortgage, and you have a look at that $1,800 a month. So we're talking here $23,000, $24,000 a year after tax. That family's having to pay to pay that mortgage. Or $1 million, you're really talking the best part of $30,000 a year. So, that's where really, even if interest rates go nowhere from here for quite some time, that's a burden that those families are going to carry into 2024, along with not only the higher cost of living and higher energy prices, but really, as I say, just the prospect that maybe the jobs market's going to tighten up for them as well.
And you say 2024, but it's 2024 and beyond. I mean, these increases are staying there unless rates come down and come down dramatically. No one's really forecasting that. The best they're saying is they might steady. They might remain in a hold position. But if you're someone who's looking at an extra $30,000 post-tax, as you rightly say, to put into their mortgage for next year, it's likely to be that and more for the year after and the year after. And of course, their wages aren't going up by $30,000 a year.
No, that's the point. And here's the issue, is that people now talking about interest rates coming down. Well, in the United States, they're talking about rates falling in the first half of next year. But here in Australia, because Australia's central bank, the Reserve Bank, was slower than other central banks to start raising rates and then hasn't raised rates as high as other central banks around the world have, it's likely that we're going to be the last, particularly of the Western economies, to come out of these rates. And really, if you think about this is about the so-called glide to try and hang on the jobs to keep Australia's economy going sharp. But the fact is that while you're doing that, you're also creating more inflation that leaves the next step to interest rates staying higher for longer.
What about these reports today, Ross, that first home buyers are committing to larger mortgages than any other time in Australia's history? Indeed, I read that some of these repayments are 65, so 2/3 higher than they were pre-pandemic. Now, I am staggered. That 65% figure staggers me. I'm hoping they realise it's all got to be paid back and with interest.
Well, you'd really hope so, because a lot of these people who are buying them, first home buyers, are relying on the fact that they've got two incomes coming into their homes. They've got to hope that they can keep those two jobs right the way through. And they've also got to hope that banks take what is right now the sort of, if you like, generous attitude that they generally don't throw people out of their homes if their circumstances change. But the fact of the matter is, if all of a sudden you get a sharp increase in the jobless rate because we've got this problem with inflation and higher interest rates for longer, then that is almost the worst scenario, the hard landing for our economy. And so you just wonder, A, who's lending the money to people, and then B, sort of what tests are being sort of committed to actually have people get these loans. So I just find it quite staggering in some ways. There's still a lot of money in our community, make no bones about that. And most people are coping because they've got a job. But you do worry at the edges, not only for people renting and desperate to get out of the rental markets, but also for new home buyers, as you say, taking on these enormous mortgages that, frankly, in some cases, I'd actually balk at myself.
What about this report today that the biggest super funds in the country are split on whether customers should be automatically, so without their permission, rolled into pension products when they get to retirement age, which I take to mean there'll be some move to stop them getting a lump sum, let's say, and paying up the remainder of their mortgage and force them into a pension. Is that what's on the table?
Peter, this is you and me. Come on, now think about this in your own terms. Whose money is it? right? This is a really important debate. I'm surprised that people aren't already out protesting in the streets over this, because ultimately when the compulsory superannuation system was set up in Australia, which has been quite brilliant for people's savings and for their outcomes, we were told that this was because the government couldn't afford long-term the pensions for all the baby boomers and beyond, and that we'd have to look after ourselves. It's your money. You've got the choice as to what you do with it. Well, now the government's now saying, well, actually, maybe you don't have choices to what you do with it, because maybe we actually need you to put it into these income-styled annuity products, so that instead of being able to say, I want to go take a trip to Europe or pay off the car or pay off the house, it might be a case where, sorry, you've now got to have an income coming and then manage from that. Now, that to me is not the spirit of where they were originally. There's incentives for you to take out these products, which go to social services and also tax. So there's good reason for people to take them out already. Being compelled to do it, I wonder whether that's a step too far. And already, with some of the big superannuation funds, that has split them in terms of their support for that idea, or whether, in fact, people should really be able to treat this as their own money.
Socialism on super there, Ross. You're right. Healthy reminder, you and I are almost at that tipping point to start thinking about these things. Well, I certainly am. So that's not good. That's not good.
It's our money.
Thanks for your time, as always.
It's our money, Peter. It's our money.
It is our money. It is our money, Ross. No, I just tell you what, I do not forget that. All right, let's go to the break. After the break, Israel warning citizens to be cautious when travelling overseas. And I'm sorry to say the countries include Australia. Plus, we'll also speak to Shadow Attorney General Michaelia Cash, who blasted Labor today. I tell you what, she was ferocious about this whole issue of foreign criminals in the community. Senator Michaelia Cash coming up, but first now to my international panel. I'm joined, as I am every Thursday, Tuesday, goodness me, I'm already checking out, aren't I, by former Labor MP Michael Danby, Sky News contributor Kosha Gada. Well, welcome to you both. I want to start, if I can, with you, Kosha. Britain has announced really wholesale changes to migration. This is the legal migration, not the illegal stuff that's coming across the channel. But what's really interesting here, and I think this is a lesson for Australia, they're really cracking down once you get a visa on this idea that you get to bring all your family and your relatives. That happens in the UK. That will go. Sure, when you're a citizen, bring your family, but they're saying no longer on just a visa.
It's a big deal. And as we know, immigration is shaping up to be the seminal issue of our time, probably, in the Western world. A lot of the focus goes on illegal, as you mentioned, but legal is a big part of it, too. And this whole concept, chain migration, is how some people refer to it, maybe pejoratively, but that's what it is. One person comes in, a couple generations later, you could trace up to even 100 people in some cases, attached to that one. I think what's going to happen, though, it's a move in the right direction in terms of what the electorate of the Conservative Party wants. It was a big part of Brexit. It's a kitchen table issue for them. But there's so much opposition on the other side. And the longer you wait, just the mathematics become more difficult, because you've got constituents now in both parties who are going to be opposed to this. So it's going to take a steely spine and a lot of pushback to come. But I think it's a step in the right direction for serving what their constituency actually cares about.
Israel's had to issue travel warnings to Jews leaving the country, or even Jews moving around internationally. And unfortunately, I'm sad to say, Australia is one of the countries they're warning people about.
Isn't that a shame, Peter? Oh, what a great country we are, and that we would traduce ourselves by Yasmin Catley, the New South Wales Police Minister, or Anthony Carbines, the Police Minister here in Victoria, not doing their job. I understand today the Israeli ambassador wrote to the Police Minister in Victoria and the Premier, because they were not provided, the hostages at that Crown Plaza Hotel. God knows, from the hotel's point of view, how they got that those hostage families were there, that they wouldn't provide police protection for them. They had to be scurried away to a police station. What a shame on those people. What has to happen, Anthony Carbines and Ms Catley? Does someone have to die before you're willing to sort of tell the police to do their job?
I just understand, just quickly, I understand too, in Victoria, unlike New South Wales, there are not police involved at synagogues and at schools. In New South Wales there is. What's happening there, do you know?
Well, they provide private security, which is enormously expensive, but people aren't whinging about that. It's just, in these public functions, that the police, separate the people but don't keep them away in Caulfield outside the synagogue, and service has to close, and then we've got, the hostage families being harassed at Crown Plaza Hotel, a hotel whose name should live in infamy.
October 7, as more and more has emerged, and I've spent a bit of time today looking at some pretty horrific videos there about what was done to women and children, that women were gang raped by 7, 8, 9, 10 Hamas terrorists and then had their heads cut off, that corpses were defiled. Where is the UN on this, Kosha? Where are all the women's bodies on this? Because they are horrifically silent.
Horrifically silent. I think the sad reality is this is another example of those organisations not covering themselves in glory. And
yeah, but it's bigger than that. I mean, there were signs last night, that event in, I think it was Elstonwick, Michael, the vigil. You know, me too, unless you're a Jew.
Yeah, heinous stuff. And it's just a continuation of I think what we know, and maybe this is bringing it undeniably into the forefront, which is they're not cause-driven organisations or movements for the large part. They're agenda-driven, covert agendas, overt agendas. This agenda doesn't fit with, you know, what maybe their other masters are that they're serving, and just the way this issue has taken shape. And that's why the silence is conspicuous. You know, and they've been quiet for all sorts of other things, people that have been let off the hook. The trans issue, I'm not equating them. I'm just saying these are all issues that you know, don't stand up for women's rights, and I think that just shows that they're silent.
And worse, Kosha, the woke far left deny that it even happened. So, I mean, Hamas boasts of it, puts the GoPro videos on their helmets and distributes it, puts it live, and these wackos deny that it happened. I mean, we're living in an alternative universe where people are so siloed by social media and that kind of stuff that I wonder if it's going to affect us with terrorist incidents all over the world. They're happening everywhere.
I was just going to say, just on that, we know in the Philippines, it used to be different organisations in the Philippines, but it's been an ISIS declared event there, a bomb going off in a church, I think 4 killed. We know in Paris, 3 were killed, knifed in the street by a bloke chanting Allah Akbar. And then there's this debate on television. I watched stuff over the weekend. There's a debate whether it really was a terror attack. Now, if it looks and sounds like a terror attack, I bet you it is a terror attack. I mean, clearly, and you know that there are sleeper cells, Michael, better than anyone, you know there's sleeper cells around the world. It feels to me like the jihadists are emboldened.
And they're working with the woke left. Down in Port Melbourne, there are crazy transgender people who are protesting against the export of Israeli arms from Australia. There are no Israeli arms exported from Australia. There are people in Brisbane boycotting Israeli restaurants because they use Emmanuel Ottolenghi's sometimes Arabic food. I mean, what is going on in the world? This is all upside down.
You try me transgender in Gaza and see how far you go. I mean, this is the extraordinary stuff. Hey, just quickly, more race revelations in and around the royal family. What's the latest?
I think the big picture is that this institution is not impervious to racism allegations, and we see it at every turn. The latest is, I think, one of the journalists who's known to be quite friendly to Harry and Meghan had a transcript leaked of a manuscript that came out that names allegedly the person that questioned the skin tone of the unborn baby Archie, and that's been retracted, been denied on the surface, but it's out there, which is a well-known tactic for those savvy in the PR machine of Hollywood, and I think people can draw their own conclusions about where that comes from.
And silence is deafening too by Harry and Meghan.
And probably that's part of the scheme, is what many people are saying, for getting stuff out there, but then having plausible deniability, but you still sort of plant the stories that you want.
Michael Danby, Kosha, thank you both. Just so you are updated, there came news overnight from Buckingham Palace too that the King Charles and Queen Camilla will come to Australia next spring, we're told. It'll be his first visit, of course, as King. They were both here, I think, about 5 years ago, just before COVID anyway. There you go, a return visit there of the once Prince of Wales, a frequent visitor for Australia. He went to high school here. High school in Australia, so that's nice to have him back. All right, we'll take a quick break. Coming back, Michaelia Cash and more. Welcome back now. It's just been reported that expelled Victorian Liberal MP Moira Deeming has lodged her statement of claim against John Pizzuto in the federal court. Deeming's lawyers argue that a press release by Pizzuto contained imputations that she supports, sympathises with or associates with white supremacists and neo-Nazis because she attended the Let Women Speak rally for women's rights back in February in Melbourne. Deeming's lawyers include high-profile defamation barrister Sue Chrysanthou and Patrick George. The defamation action could cost Pizzuto more than $1 million in legal fees and compensation, and potentially his job. We're waiting on Senator Cash. She's been tied up in the Senate, but I have got a terrific guest for you now. As my regulars will know, there's a growing movement across regional Australia to oppose the declaration of desecration of farming land and our beautiful landscapes, all in the name of renewables. And some campaigners are getting creative. Last week I came across a young Victorian musician who was rallying against new transmission lines that will run through homes and farms in Gorock, a lovely part of Victoria located between Horsham and Bendigo in the west of the state. Here she is.
And don't it always seem to go that you don't know what that'll take till it's gone. It's our paradise and they're putting up big power lines. Ooh, ba, 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 ooh.
And that beautiful singer, Eleanor, joins me now in the studio. Hey, you've got a beautiful voice.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me on, Peter.
And it's gone so viral. What motivated you to put your head above the parapet and take on this issue? Because it is a big issue. I know in regional Australia, not just Victoria, people are really concerned, aren't they?
That's it. So I guess what motivated us is our small family farm was originally in a plan which was put out by AEMO, which was going to put the transmission line. Now this plan was a width of 50 kilometres and it was running through all of Victoria, and we were in that initial plan. So we were smack bang in the middle, luck wasn't on our side, you know, in the middle we're kind of like, okay, this is probably not looking too fantastic for us, and we felt helpless. So what we wanted to do was try and get the word out there and get the conversation happening. So you know, people were going to protest, which was fabulous, but we're a musical family. I'm a musician, a music teacher, and we thought we could do maybe something different, target a different audience, put out a visual and some music, and that's where the idea stemmed to do a bit of a parody of Jody Mitchell's Big Yellow Taxi. It worked so fantastically. So I guess that's kind of our backstory. You know, we were directly affected, so we wanted to do something to make a difference for our community.
A lot of people look at those landscapes and think they're just beautiful. And we've got oceans too that will soon have wind turbines. But in your case, it's those big transmission lines. Now, someone might say to you who don't understand, why would you be worried about them crossing farmland? What's the big deal? Tell us what the big deal is.
Well, there's a lot of issues with the transmission lines. You know, there's fire hazards, there's devaluation of land. There's also the amount of land I feel like people don't understand is to go renewable and to meet these standards that they want to get to, we have to take a lot of agricultural land. Now, that's just not transmission lines. And we just went to the Sydney protest, the Reckless Renewable Rally, and we got to meet a lot of other people who are affected by the same thing. They're affected by turbines, by solar panels, by transmission lines. So it's a big thing because when you look at how much land they're going to take, not just for transmission lines, issues come into play like food security. Are we going to have enough food in Australia? And again, the devaluation of land is a big thing for our own farmers. You know, once these are going to be put up on their land, it's going to plummet the value of their land, and it's going to be harder for them to sell. And also there's a massive the hazards of working it, so there's going to be all these issues and regulations that they're going to have to abide by. Just
harvesters, augers, all the things that could interfere and hit and cause death, obviously transmission lines. What amazes me though is, I guess yet again, country people are bearing the brunt for decisions made to benefit urban Australians. You know, these are not going, these turbines on Manly Beach. No one's putting a transmission line through Brighton or, you know, the nice eastern parts of Sydney. It's country people forced to bear the brunt.
That's it. And once again, we are having to stand up for that, you know, and trying to protect the environment, you know, trying to save the trees, trying to, you know, keep the economy.
But farmers are great custodians of the environment.
That's it, you know, we are passionate about the land, and here we are fighting for the land. You know, we're really concerned about, again, the trees, again, the food security, the birds, the bees. That's one of the lines in the songs that we kept the original, you know, like leave them in peace along with the birds and the bees. So again, here we are trying to protect the land, and, you know, we need help. We need help to spread that word, and that's why we put the song out, to get that conversation happening.
I'm going to put a link to the song on the Sky News website. People can go there, find out more, support your good cause. Eleanor, I think you're amazing.
Thank you so much for having me on. I appreciate it.
Delighted. We grew up, well, I certainly did, but she's still there, not far from each other, so I'm very delighted to support anyone in the bush against this renewable push. All right, after the break, Shadow Attorney General Michaelia Cash. Welcome back. Well, tensions were high in the Senate today as news broke that the third of the released foreign criminals, this one a convicted ringleader of a child exploitation gang, was arrested in Melbourne after allegedly making contact with a minor. Joining me now, Senator Michaelia Cash, Shadow Attorney General. Well, Senator, I don't think it could get any worse for the government, but we've had no minister nor the Prime Minister front the public and give them confidence they have got this matter in hand, have we?
Well, Peter, this is a total abrogation of duty by the Prime Minister, by Minister Giles and Minister O'Neill. They should be fronting the Australian public and apologising for the complete, total and utter disaster which they have put Australians through now for the last 4 weeks. And instead, they've gone to ground. 147 hardcore criminals have now been released onto the streets of the Australian community by the Albanese government. Our worst fears, Peter, were realised yesterday when we saw reported one of these people has been arrested and charged with sexually assaulting a woman, and then if it couldn't get any worse, the detainee today in relation to trying to contact a minor. Where is the Prime Minister? This is a time to show leadership, and he is failing in that regard.
What was the response of Penny Wong and others in the Senate today? I mean, how on earth can they possibly defend the handling of this? Because it has been a calamity from the start.
Peter, I have never seen a government so full of excuses. In fact, they're so full of excuses that after question time today, the opposition moved to bring on the migration bill so that we could properly deal with the preventative detention regime. And Peter, the Labor Party were forced to agree with the motion that the opposition put forward. So we have just passed, because of the motion moved by the coalition in the Senate, Labor's preventative detention regime. Peter Dutton, he has been telling Labor to implement this since day one. They told us it was not possible. It has now taken 4 weeks, 147 hardcore criminals, 2 that we now know have been charged by police, and yet Labor still didn't want to act. So the coalition successfully moved today to bring this bill on, and I'm pleased to tell you that finally Peter Dutton has actually got what he has been calling for, and that is for the Labor Party to introduce a preventative detention regime.
So just so I'm really clear, you've brought on the legislation, so it's now been introduced. You're saying it's also passed the Senate, is that right, or just introduced?
Absolutely. No, Peter, we insisted it be passed tonight. I have just left the Senate and we have just passed the legislation. The legislation will now go to the House of Representatives on Thursday. But guess what? 4 weeks too late. You've got to be kidding me. But not only that, the mere fact of passing the legislation, Peter, it only sets up the scheme. What is the minister going to do now? Has he undertaken an assessment in relation to the 147 hardcore criminals to work out whether or not he'll even make an application? It's over to the Labor Party now, and guess what? I don't hold my breath.
Well, Senator Cash, that was the worry of your leader, Peter Dutton. He made comments yesterday to say, you know, yeah, put this thing in, sure, this is Labor's plan, but he's not confident more than a couple of them would actually go back behind bars.
I asked the minister in the Senate, Murray Watt, how many of the 147 detainees, hardcore criminals they have released onto the street will actually even make the first step of the test. And guess what? The minister couldn't tell me. You would have thought that you would have already done as a responsible government an assessment of every single one of those now released to know whether or not the minister can even consider making an application. But guess what? Yet again, Peter, total incompetence by this government. How Mr Albanese hasn't sacked these two ministers, I think, is now beyond Australia.
Well, they've got to go. They've got to go, don't they? They've got to go.
Oh, Peter, seriously, 147 hardcore criminals. The government refuses to answer any questions on them. I mean, now you've got, two have now been, charged by the police for reoffending sexual offences. And all the government says is there's nothing to see here. A total, complete and utter abrogation of duty. The first duty of any Commonwealth government, Peter Dutton knows this, is to keep Australia and Australians safe. And this government has totally abrogated its duty. And quite frankly, shame on them.
All right. Well, thank you for coming after getting that legislation through the Parliament. Well done on you, Senator Cash. I wish you were in the job actually right now. I sleep safer at night, but there we go. You're not. But an election could fix that. That's it for me. See you tomorrow night at 6. Here's Andrew.